Hello and welcome to Daily Debrief, brought to you by People's Dispatch. I'm Swastika, and we begin with the latest from the war in Ukraine. Reports are arriving that there may be some progress on the negotiations front with the Russian and Ukrainian foreign ministers set to meet in Turkey. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that he was willing to discuss issues such as Crimea and Donbas, even while striking a defiant note and continuing to demand a no-fly zone over his country. Meanwhile, there are attempts to evacuate civilians from various parts of the country. To know more about this, we're joined by Prashant. Prashant, let's start by telling us what's happening on ground at this point of time.
Right, Swastika. So if you look at the military situation, not much has changed over the past few days, as we talked about many times in the past.
Yes.
There are a couple of key fronts. There's one, of course, around Kiev, where Russian forces are generally building up. There is the expectation that there might be an assault soon, but we also thought there might be an assault 1 week ago. So
yes,
we really don't know if that is part of the Russian battle plan, that of actually full-fledgedly attacking the city. Now then, of course, we also know that the city of Mariupol is another key, key focus point as far as the Russians are concerned. There have been attempts to evacuate from there. There might be a big full-fledged assault there as well. There are movements being taken in the Donbas region as well over the past few days. So these are definitely more or less the three key flanks that we're talking about. This has, like you said, led to a massive humanitarian crisis, a large number of refugees going to countries across Ukraine. And it's important to note that because a lot of the Western reports have focused on refugees moving from in the countries west of Ukraine, that's Hungary, Romania, for instance. But we also do see that there are Russian-speaking refugees, for instance, moving into Belarus and Russia as well.
Yes.
So there's all a wide-scale refugee crisis that is going on. Multiple attempts being made at, of course, setting up some kind of a humanitarian corridor. Some of them have worked a bit, some of them have failed. Reports are that today one is going on as well. So I think there is a general attempt to sort of see if some civilians can be evacuated before some of the key cities might be hit, might be targeted with some more strong attacks in the coming days. So what we, I think, generally see is that there is a larger consolidation of the Russian effort, of course. The advances they seem to be making are not very dramatic, but nonetheless they are making slow and steady advances, and that seems to generally be their plan as well. There's a lot of focus on the usual kind of, preparing for what seem to be big assaults. So that's pretty much the overall picture as far as the ground situation is concerned. It may seem a bit like it's a deadlock right now, but I think it's more reflective of the fact that the Russians are perhaps preparing for a major stage as far as their attack is concerned.
Prashant, how do we look at what's happening diplomacy-wise in terms of the reaction of various countries by now?
Right. So I think two or three key questions are there. One, it's important to see what is going to happen when the Russian and Ukrainian foreign ministers meet in Turkey, a very significant meeting. Now, we do know that earlier, at least various rounds of talks have taken place between relatively far more junior members of the officialdom, so to speak.
Okay.
Nothing really much has come out of those rounds of talks except for the fact that there is a general understanding that more talks need to be held. So one of the key questions is really, I think, it boils down to what the Russian demands are, what the Ukrainian demands are, what the Ukrainians are willing to concede, etc. So, of course, the key questions being Crimea and the future of the Donbas region.
Yeah.
Now, Russia, as we know, has recognized the independence of the Donbas republics, that is Donetsk and Luhansk. So what exactly is going to happen to them, considering that so far until what the Ukrainians have offered until now has generally been some kind of autonomy within within Ukraine itself, which is what the Minsk Accords were about, right? So similarly, Crimea has been a site of confrontation as well. So it's a big question as to what these negotiations are going to lead to, because is it going to be yet another occasion for both sides to present their maximalist claims, and and then it basically ends in a deadlock, so to speak, both sides blaming each other, or is there a chance for actually bridging some of these gaps? Now, you refer to Zelensky's speech. Of course, Zelensky gave a very mixed speech, which is what he's been doing. On the one hand, he said, we want negotiations. But on the other hand, he's, like I said, asked for no-fly zone. Simultaneously, he's also critiqued NATO, saying that there is no real seriousness on their part to admit Ukraine, which is very understandable, which everyone knew for the longest time, that NATO did not want to admit Ukraine. So Zelensky has been striking all kinds of tones, also depending largely based on his audience, because it is also part of the information warfare we talk about. An important development over the past few days is, of course, Joe Biden banning the imports of Russian oil products into the United States.
Yes.
And now this is a significant move, because what we're going to see is a massive spike in inflation in the US. How much is this really going to affect Russia's Russia economically, I think is still in debate. There are arguments which say that it will not affect Russia so much because it's only a small part of Russia's exports. We're talking about India and China may absorb that. On the other hand, the United States, which is already facing a massive inflation problem, might face an even more larger inflation problem. And we also see that I think there are, there is a hesitation among European powers to do the same, which might actually be more of a game changer, so to speak. I don't think the European countries are in any way considering that. Britain, as an outlier, has said that it will consider, say, reducing its dependence on imports by the end of 2022. That's, of course, a very, very long time away. So I think what we're seeing right now is all the so-called dramatic action seems to be on the cultural and social front. A lot of these companies withdrawing, etc., etc. But I think right now both sides are sort of positioning themselves for what might be a much longer, by both sides I mean Russia on the one hand and the West on the other side, what might be a much longer say conflict in various ways. We do know that the United States is very happy at the fact that Nord Stream 2 has been Victoria Nuland was almost exulting, the US official, saying that Nord Stream 2 is now just like scrap metal under the ocean or something, which is what the US wanted. But I think the long-term impacts are going to be pretty bad. So two elements to note here, as I said. One is the question of the immediate negotiations itself, whether at least this round can see some kind of an attempt to bridge the gap, hopefully move towards some kind of a ceasefire, or whether it will end in a stalemate. The second larger question in terms of the economic impact, various people, and ultimately it's the poor who are going to suffer this impact. So that impact is really the question. More information going to come out. Russia is also applying counter sanctions.
Yes.
So I think in the coming days we'll have more clarity on that.
Well, thank you, Prashant. We will stay with this issue. Stay with us for our next story as well, which is from South Africa, where 29-year-old deputy chairperson of Abahlali baseMjondolo Ekenana occupation was killed in Durban by 4 gunmen, allegedly led by the son of the local chief of the ruling African National Congress. Now, ABM is the shack dwellers movement of the country. The main accused in the shooting was already facing a police case for an earlier attack on Sunday. Now, Ekenana was founded as a land occupation in the year 2018 and has faced numerous violent illegal evictions over the years. On 27 December 2019, the shack dwellers movement won an interdict in the High Court in Durban, preventing the municipality from continuing with illegal evictions. It was reaffirmed on 24th April 2020 after the municipality continued to evict and destroy the occupation, violating the court order and the government's COVID-19 lockdown regulations. Now, Prashant, what's happening in Durban and what has caused this attack?
Right, so I think we need to see this in the context of a long, large-scale assault on the Abahlali baseMjondolo movement, of whom the 29-year-old Ayanda Ngila, as you mentioned, has become a martyr. Very, very, very unfortunate incident, of course. But this is, like I said, part of a much more large-scale assault on this movement that has been taking place for years.
Okay.
Now, we'll come back to the story of Abahlali a bit more, but in this case itself, what we do know is that on Sunday, there was a major function at this occupation. This occupation, a very important one, because there is a lot of self-sufficient work being done by the residents who are otherwise would not have houses, and it's political work as well. And there was a major celebration on Sunday to mark the recommissioning of some of the houses which had earlier been destroyed in another eviction. And at that point of time, the thugs led by the person we're talking about, who is Khaya Ngubane, who is the son of a prominent ANC functionary there, these people had actually attacked the members of Abahlali baseMjondolo. Some of them had to be hospitalized. And after this attack, there was a police case filed. The police did not take any action. And this happened, the police case was filed on the 7th. And on March 8th, we see that the very same person, is involved in shooting Ngila, who was, a very important, functionary of this movement. Like you said, he was a deputy chairperson of the occupation. More importantly, he had spent many months in jail on what were very clearly false charges. Last year, he and 2 other comrades of his were implicated in a murder. That's a charge that is often frequently thrown at members of this movement. They spent many months in jail, and ultimately it turned out that the evidence that was used against them was problematic, was fraudulent, and then they were released. Again, in January 2021, he was again arrested, and he got out on bail only a while ago. So already at a very young age, imprisoned twice, one time very clearly under false charges, who knows, most likely in this case also the same thing would have most likely happened, and life lost in a very tragic manner because on one hand the police failed to act against against the son of a low ANC functionary. More importantly, because the fact that the state and various organizations associated with the ruling ANC, for that matter, have basically stood by or colluded in the violence that has continuously been meted out against the most vulnerable sections of the population. The important thing, of course, is that these people are not just vulnerable sections of the population; they are vulnerable sections of the population who have fought back, who have taken a stand, who have made it a point to say that we will not just be the victims of violence. We will take, we will take agency. We will actually try to rebuild. We will try to build back. And it is these people who are being targeted continuously by either the state or the political formations associated with the state.
Staying with the conversation of attacks, this is not the first time the movement or the occupation has been attacked. If you could tell us a little bit more about that, the history.
Right. So I think, Swastika, it's important to note the history of this movement and what is unique about it. Like I said, Abahlali baseMjondolo was set up in 2005. And what it is, it's a unique project globally, because across the world we talk about homelessness, across the world we talk about urban deprivation. But this is one movement where those who have faced this have said that, if the state does not do what it is supposed to do, if the state does not provide us shelter, if the state does not provide us livelihood, we will take matters into our own hands, like I said. So they have built houses, many of them ramshackle houses out of material they have scavenged. They have built, they have made gardens, they have started a political education school, very important. Like I said, they make that clear distinction that they cannot be just treated as people on the margins. They are active participants in society. So, for instance, they have had a political education school. They had poultry farms, for instance. They have engaged with organizations across the world and tried to build more awareness on the issue of urban rights, on the issue of homelessness, for instance, on the issue of people's rights. So this is, in some senses, a very historic movement, a very, very unique movement of our time, so to speak. And it is this, I think, that the state and the ruling African National Congress, for instance, they found it very difficult to tolerate it, because on the one hand it is, it goes beyond the authority of the state, right? In the sense that it is people saying that we will take matters into their own hands, even if it's building houses, right, of scavenged material, or without electricity connections, for instance. So there has been continuous attempts to evict them, continuous attempts at repression, despite the fact that there was a ban on evictions. Nonetheless, there have been attempts to basically evict them. Some of these have been by state agencies, some of these have been, like I said, by people associated or close to the state. So there have been, I think, a number of cases of, I think the Abahlali movement sources have told us, for instance, that the first usual charge put on almost everybody is that of creating a public nuisance. So what is a public nuisance? Sometimes somebody powerful might attack you if you fight back. You face a case saying public nuisance or public disturbance. Again, charges of murder have been filed against many of these activists with very little to no evidence at all. These three, Angila and two of his comrades, of course, spent time in jail. The organization's vice president, George Bonono, and other two comrades also spent time in jail on similar charges, all of which finally were found to be completely groundless. So what we see is that the Ekhanan occupation in Durban is just one of the occupations, one of the more important ones, but there are many other occupations led by the movement as well. So what we basically see is a state that is, in some senses, completely withdrawing from its responsibility and attacking those who choose to stand up for themselves and their rights. So very important struggle that ABM has been waging, and it's very unfortunate that the state has failed. In this case, we have a very direct example with that of the police, but even in previous instances, we have seen no real support from the state in any senses, and like I said, many attempts at collusion as well in this violence.
Thank you, Prashant, for joining us with those details. Moving on to our next story. The US Senate unanimously passed a bill on Monday that criminalizes lynching, making it punishable by up to 30 years in prison. While it eased through both chambers of Congress, this time with virtually no opposition, the path to passage took more than 100 years and 200 failed attempts. Under the bill named the Emmett Till Anti-lynching Act after the 14-year-old boy from Chicago who was lynched while visiting his family in Mississippi, a crime can be prosecuted as lynching when a hate crime results in a death or injury. This was said by Representative Bobby Rush a long-time sponsor of the legislation. Now, let's go over to Anish to understand more about this bill. Anish, what is the significance of this bill in today's United States of America?
It is significant in the manner that it gives out a clear message of acknowledging a historical wrong. We have to understand that lynching, the way that the bill recognizes or bill defines, is virtually a rare instance in today's United States. Obviously, you have had cases like Abahlali killing, which could be categorized as a lynching phenomenon. But in general, if you look at it, the manner in which it existed, not only during the Jim Crow laws, but even during the civil rights movement period in the 60s or the 70s even, does not exist as a mass phenomenon. But at the same time, this was necessary because there's virtually no federal law that criminalized it. There are laws that criminalizes certain instances of violent attacks that are, that can be racist or are racially prejudiced. But lynching as a thing was not addressed, and so it kind of corrects that historical wrong. But at the same time, we have to understand like a lot of things, like the way this bill has, as you said, it took more than 100 years. The first kind of anti-lynching bill that was introduced in the United States was in 1900, much before, 55 years before Emmett Till's murder happened. So we are talking about a long history of black civil rights movement trying to get a law to be passed. And this is something that also speaks volumes of how US political culture, especially the right wing of the United States, have acted. You have to remember in the 1900s, 1920s, the Democrats were the right wing, and they were the ones who often blocked the bill. Now today they are the sponsors of the bill.
Yes.
So obviously history has changed to a great extent, but this shows how there has been a reluctance on the part of the US establishment to address a lot of historical wrongs. And that comes across even today when we talk about current racial prejudice and violence. It is something that continues, that sort of behavior from the establishment continues.
In fact, if you could tell us more about that, how the passing of the bill with the current forms of racial discrimination and violence.
Yeah, so this is something that has been pointed out by several civil rights activists, currently black rights activists, who have pointed out that obviously this bill is important, historically speaking, and as a message that is being given out. But at the same time, you have to understand that the current forms of violence that are inflicted on racial minorities of the country does not come from now mobs or racist mobs calling for death or calling for violence. It is coming from the state itself. Now, if you look at the data and this data of police killings in the United States since 2015, when independent groups and even the government have started actually tabulating numbers of police killings across the country, the U.S. police in the U.S. across the U.S. have actually been killing at a rate of 1,000 people per year. Last year itself, it crossed 1,000 again. And this is happening every year. Already we are looking at more than 130 killings so far this year. So this is something that really needs to be addressed, where the state itself is now far more complicit in direct violence perpetrated on minorities, especially young black men, because if you look at the rate of younger black men being victims of police violence, it is much higher than anybody. It stands at 38 per million, when for an average white person it is like about 50. So we are talking about somebody who's more than twice as likely to be killed, a racial demographic we are speaking about very specifically. And so these factors need to be addressed. Police reforms, it's alone. Absolutely. Forget about police abolition. our judicial
Intervention.
not judicial intervention, change in the judicial system, the criminal justice system, is still far from possible in the US. Simple reforms like even doing away with chokeholds, doing away with very violent ways of apprehending criminals or suspected criminals, or even facts like no-knock warrants or other things that are actually causing deaths, or for that matter, militarization of police, where the police have military-grade weapons, or their usage of tear gas and other forms of weaponry on protesters, and even just the people they suspect, not even people they have warrant against, people they just suspect, is something that basic reforms are very difficult to get through. And the US federal government, both the Congress, even many in the current Democratic Party, which is taking the credit for this anti-lynching bill, are quite hesitant to go through that route. Abolition is a far-fetched dream right now. Police abolitions, like the basic level of not using it for non-criminal cases, for smaller social interventions, is quite impossible. So this is the reality that is also happening right now, and that really needs to be acknowledged, even when we celebrate the passing of this bill.
I mean, we are celebrating 100 years of attempting to pass this bill,
exactly.
and 200 failed attempts. So
Exactly,
yes, absolutely. Thank you, Anish, for joining us with those details. That's all that we have on Daily Debrief. Do keep watching us and follow us on People's Dispatch, and come back and join our bulletin tomorrow.